I saw a sign the other day while I was driving that said, "Construction ends." And it was a fucking lie. Let's bring on Vance.
Well, there's really only
Vance,
two seasons. Yeah, I'm great. There's really only two seasons, winter and road construction, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's good to know that there's some things other than illegal migrants that cross borders. For everybody tuning in to Mashup 115, just ignore the banner at the top. That was Sean's mistake. We are Mashup 115, and we have the guest host today of Vance Crowe from Legacy Interviews coming in from Illinois.
No, I don't live in Illinois. No,
sorry.
No self-respecting American would live in Illinois. I live in the great state of Missouri.
Missouri. I blanked out for a second there. My apologies. So, how are you?
I was born
today?
in Illinois, the land of Lincoln. I'm doing great. You know, I got healthy kids. The sun is shining. It is the weekend. We did a live episode of the Ag Tribes Report last night, and it was a huge success. And then, bang! Here I am this morning talking to you on Mashup 115, which is like my favorite podcast that I listen to each week. So it's pretty fun to be the guest co-host.
That means a lot. You were top of the list when we said we need to figure out who all is going to be on for all the guest hosts while Sean is off on his walkabout. And
yeah, well, I know a shockingly surprising amount about Canadian politics, like totally useless. Like I only listen for the banter because, you guys are just a vassal state of the U.S. It doesn't really matter what you guys do up here. It's like watching an ant colony or something.
Yes. It's always cute to have trash talk from Canada's pants. All right, Leanne. Hi, twos. Leanne, it's great to see that you've updated your profile picture. And Bonnie says, "Good morning, fellas." Good morning, Bonnie. Okay, well, you know what? Actually, before we get cracking too far, do you want to just tell us about the new show that you've got?
Yeah, so I have, for as long as I've run a podcast, I have a podcast called the Vance Crowe Podcast. And for the last 5 years, I've always wanted it to be a live podcast, but I've never been able to get over the hump of doing it. I just couldn't figure it out. And then the last time I did this episode with you, it was so obvious that if twos could make this thing happen, then really anybody could. And so I sat down, I finally figured out how to do it. And what I'm doing is a podcast called the Ag Tribes Report. When people think about agriculture, you think of just one cohesive group of ag. But the reality is it is a whole bunch of tribes, whether they're ranchers or grain farmers or people out west or people trucking or people running elevators. And what I want to do is each week bring people on that know a specific tribe really well and talk about what is the cultural news going on there. So not what are markets doing, not what's the weather, but like, hey, John Deere just got targeted because of all their DEI initiatives. Let's talk about this, because the reality is in agriculture, these major news outlets are never going to flip the point the finger at some of these large companies and what they're doing because they're such big advertisers. And so it's an opportunity to get in there and actually put together a professional show that tells people, hey, this is what is actually going on in the world of ag news. I'm pretty excited about it. It was a big success last night.
That's great to hear. It's kind of funny to think about the idea of having a show where people actually tell you what's really going on in the world and they don't give a crap about pissing off big name sponsors. That's a good model. I like that. We should try that sometime.
Yeah, I wonder where I picked that idea up from, right? It's also just so glorious to not have sponsors. I mean, what would I do with all that money if I did have a big name sponsor?
Oh, you wouldn't even have time to do the podcast anymore.
Which hopefully we get to a point where people are paying me not to do the podcast. That'd be the right spot to be in.
Oh, actually, yeah. That would be, I like that idea even better, to be honest. Like, how much money would it take for you to retire? Well, it's funny you should ask. I have paper spreadsheet.
So one thing that you guys do that I absolutely love is the fact that you are keeping a spotlight on the Coots too. And so I probably kick it off. How many days have they been locked away?
Well, we are at 880 days. 880. And we got the problem with having you on is that we haven't just chatted in a while, and I was having a lot of fun before the show went live. And I didn't quite get the presentation set up, but here we go. So this is a 2022 email about what's going on with the Coots people who at this point have been in jail for probably a year or something like that, depending on the exact timing. So the subject is federal Coots POE et al. SA, and it's from February 9th. This came out in an access to information. The important thing is highlighted here. Update on meetings this morning. Media, nothing new. We're getting roasted on social media. That's the thing. They're not really, you'd think that the RCMP would be meeting about what's going on, who's breaking laws, how we could stop them. But one of their major concerns from that particular meeting was the fact that people are mad as hell about what's going on with the Coots people. And this was almost 2.5 years ago now. So
something that's worth talking about here is about, like, when you look at a brand, whether it's the RCMP or a large corporation, John Deere, for example, is big in the news right now in the US. You look at them and you think, if I tweet at them, this is no big deal. They're a giant, castle. And so I'm just throwing tomatoes at the wall. But the reality is those people have hired many, many people to just sit there and work on social media. And so when you put stuff out there, it makes them nervous. And they oftentimes, these are just bureaucrats. True. Yeah, and they're just sitting there on their phones and on their computers. And so you can spin a bunch of people up to do a whole bunch of, like, damage control and how are we going to respond to this by tweeting. And it is a superpower that you can't see because behind the walls, they're running around like crazy. And if you're effective at getting people talking about something, you can actually get them to change what they're doing. So I think it's really important to see stuff like that even the RCMP is watching what people are saying.
I bet you they're watching this right now. So actually, you had on an older episode, you had somebody talking about how they broke the FBI entrapment with Governor Whitmer in Michigan. And
Julie Kelly. Yeah, of course. Yes.
I couldn't recall her name. Was there anything like this? So basically, it seems the parallels, I guess, between the Coots 2 and this is that you had a bunch of federal agents trying to entrap people and then prosecuting them just for the sake of it. It seemed like, and for the political ramifications of having people who were intending to do such a thing. If I understood what happened in Michigan correctly. Now, did you see anything like this with the social media fallout with the FBI? I mean, the FBI doesn't really have a sterling track record.
Yeah, but I mean, no doubt they're watching what everybody's saying. I mean, Julie Kelly, the way that she became the important name that she is that she is out on social media, putting things out on Twitter or X and getting people to say, like, oh, I didn't know about that. And she keeps things top of mind. So there's no question in my mind that social media is the only way that Whitmer kidnapping case would have seen the light of day, was because the national media they're not going to cover it. And if they do, it's going to be with such a bent that you'd feel like I can't do anything about it. Social media, as much as it's been hijacked, particularly the Facebooks and Instagrams and YouTubes of the world, X in particular is a tremendously powerful force.
Yeah. It's basically where you get the news now. What's going on? God damn it. Oh, yeah, I bet you Sean just hit the make sure everything goes on repeat button. That son of a gun. It definitely wasn't me screwing anything up. There's no way. All right. So now here's our next
heat
article.
Wave new color of the week. This has been an enjoyable thing to see, is what color are they using to represent the extremely high temperatures that you guys are facing out there in Western Canada?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been talking about this for several weeks for anybody who's not up to date on the mashup, where you said, okay, well, what are they possibly going to get that's scarier? Because they went bright red a few weeks ago, and then there was nothing. Where do you go from that? And then they went with purple, and you think about it after the fact, and you're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I can see where they went with purple, but every time, I don't know, I'm not a graphic designer, and so every time they come out with the new scariest color, I'm like, well, there's nowhere for them to go from here, and then they come up with this clever little workaround. And the latest one, if you look in the bottom corner, is white. Now, I don't, again, I'm getting tired of saying this, but where do you go from this particular color? What's the next hottest thing after white hot?
I think that it's just going to be like blackness underneath it. It'll look like it's actually been burned through the map, that the colors are so hot that
like the old
just can't
school
even
Wild
hold up.
West maps and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah. With little like the edges of it will be singed off just a little bit.
I like that. Yeah, if anybody's listening from the Weather Channel, you know where things are going next.
Well, and that brings us to Weather Channel. They're all a part of the large media. We've already been talking about it. The media is evil. And although it's kind of self-explanatory, you had some really, really good links up here that were just showing just how ridiculous the whole media there is right now.
Thanks, man. So Milwaukee radio station says it agreed to edit interview with Joe Biden. And there was also another one, I want to say in New Jersey, that didn't end up on this list, where they actually fired the host because the questions were all vetted beforehand. So it wasn't really an interview. It was just a script. But this one, home of the Brewers, they interviewed Joe Biden on the radio, and then there was a few kind of stuttering stumbles and losses of train of thought. And immediately after the interview, which wasn't live, Biden's team reached out and said, hey, we need you to cut this part and this part. And they did. And then the other one here, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Global, but their owner is Chorus Entertainment, and their market cap has been absolutely tanking for several years. And it's a penny stock. I think it's trading at about 12 cents right now. And they're looking at going into receivership. They made a great move in 2018 when they bought up a whole bunch of cable channels. And yeah.
Yeah, it's like going out and buying a bunch of AM radio stations. Like who's doing this? There's like the AM at least has some value in the fact that it can bounce a signal around, but who's investing in cable news right now seems insane to me. Well,
Revenue Canada, for example, there's a lot of things that you're required to fax them if you ever need to work with them. And it's by far the most difficult part of the process, which is a lot considering the fact that it's the government, is tracking down a fax machine. Like they're in a situation where they've got the last fax machine in the world, and it stays pretty quiet for some reason. And this is one of the things that Chorus did, was they bought up all of this cable. And now they're saddled with a lot of debt, of which a lot of it is now current debt from this 2018 buyout. And they've got $300 million due for repayment within the next 3 years. And the market cap is non-existent. And I don't know if it gets much worse. Maybe Sean and I are going to buy it.
Well, Elon was just today tweeting about how the mainstream news is actually yesterday's news. So it's like the slowest form. It's way down the graph. I wanted to talk a little bit about that Milwaukee story that you're talking about, because I actually went to school in Milwaukee at Marquette University. And one of the things that I remember from school was that my professors, because I was in communication, so I had to take some journalism classes, they were grizzled old men that were like bitter and smoking cigarettes. And they had this disdain for politicians that was palpable. And even if they were, let's just say they were left leaning, at the end of the day, what they wanted was the story. They wanted to catch their side, the other side, whatever, doing something dumb, getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And I'm not being nostalgic.
They had a thirst for the good articles.
Yeah, I mean, and whether or not they were propagandists like they are now, they probably were, but it was different. And the reason these corporate media are dying is because who wants to go? It's like going and reading the press releases from the government. It's the same thing. They are putting out the news that the government wants them to print. This is a great evidence of it. But it's funny because as Biden's cognitive decline has become so obvious, what we're now seeing is the media turning on him. And who it's like the dog, a hungry dog will finally turn on its master at some point, and that's what seems to be happening because they're trying to be the first ones to get the jugular shot.
Well, it's funny you should mention that.
Kamala is Biden her time.
Isn't it funny how we've all known about this for years? Like I've been talking about this for at least 5. Since even before Biden got in, even during the, he hid in his basement for the whole election and they got the most votes out of any president ever, which totally seems reasonable. And now after this latest debate, it seems like all the legacy media in the States and in Canada too are just surprised. They're flummoxed. We were blindsided by this.
I mean, it's just so absurd. And I think, you look at some of the tweets that are going on now where they're showing Biden, and what he's saying and how incoherent some of his messages are. And you think you could show this to a child and the child would be very clear to say like, oh, grandpa's not doing well. Like he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. And so the media to do this whole thing of them being surprised is so deeply disingenuous, right? Like, but they have to back it off now. So, and I think what's really funny is the tweet I think I saw where Donald Trump was being quoted as that having Kamala Harris as the vice president was actually a genius move by the Biden campaign because nobody wants Kamala Harris, right? She got knocked out of the race with less than 1% of the vote in the primary.
And they could have had Tulsi.
And so if that had happened, then Biden would have been really vulnerable because people would have looked around and been like, wow, let's get rid of Biden. And the people that are his handlers would have lost that power. But instead, people are like, I'd rather have the bureaucratic, deep state, the people that are behind Biden doing this than I would to have Kamala Harris in charge. And so it really was a genius move to pick her. But they're also, well, I was going to say they're in a bind, right? Because they have been the group that said, "Hey, we want to support women, and we want race to play a factor in whether or not you get opportunities." So now they're in the spot of, are you going to jump over the woman of an ambiguous ethnic descent? I don't even know what she is.
The woman of every color.
Yeah, in place of somebody. Newsom, the whitest white guy in the world. Like now all of these people that have supported you because of a lot of these ideals will see, oh, this was all just smoke and mirrors for you guys to get what you want. So they have a real poison pill there. And I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen, but I can tell you it's going to be chaotic for the Democrats.
Wouldn't it be funny if they put Gavin Newsom up and then people said, well, why didn't Kamala Harris get the opportunity? And you said, well, she is a woman of varying ethnic backgrounds, depending on which group she's talking to. And her going to vice president was way further than she had any right to ever go on her own. And it was testament to our DEI initiatives that she got as far as she did. So Kamala, you're welcome, but we're going to let the adults handle it. That would be pretty funny. Here's, you had mentioned this before, so I'm going to play this clip real quick. This is Trudeau at the NATO summit, which we're going to talk about later, answering a question about Sleepy Joe Biden.
Stepped down because of concerns over his mental acuity at the age of 81 years old. During this NATO summit, Mr. Prime Minister, what is your assessment of President Biden's performance and if he can lead on the global stage?
We are lucky on the world stage to have Joe Biden leading
how many
here at NATO
are in this clip.
On the G7 in some extraordinarily consequential times. His depth of experience, his thoughtfulness, his steadfastness on the greatest issues and challenges of our time is a credit to the work that we're all doing together. And it has been, as always, a privilege and pleasure to work alongside him on big issues, and I look forward to continuing to.
Now, the other thing to notice was that he said absolutely nothing of substance there.
I think he said everything. I mean, like, this is the thing that I love my Canadian brethren. I should give a big shout out to my man Dan Plummer and Candace Plummer. Some of my favorite people are Canadians.
Wouldn't it be funny if they were electricians?
You guys are a vassal state of the U.S., and that is the most clear evidence that you can have of it. It is that when your president, who should be able to say whatever he wants, you should be free to point out the obvious, now has to say, no, I love the emperor's clothes. They're so beautiful. Look at how shiny and beautiful they are. It's like that fairy tale myth or whatever that we told children coming true right before our eyes. And I mean, frankly, it's shameful that anyone would say that, but you understand he's doing it because without it, something bad will happen to him.
That's fair.
Michigan voter deform. So I didn't know anything about this. I was shocked when you posted it up there. There's now a Michigan law that is getting passed that makes it harder to get recounts and investigations into elections.
Yeah, so the aforementioned Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed this controversial election recount frauds bill, and you basically summed it up far better than I would. I would do it with far more words, but that's basically the nuts and bolts of it, is that if there's any suspected chicanery going on, it's going to be harder to get to the bottom of it in Michigan, which I'm not sure if you know this or not, is a bit of a swing state. And so if there was something like this in California or say Tennessee, it wouldn't really matter too much one way or the other because, the person who's going to win in our state got 73% of the vote instead of 72. But when it's on a coin flip state like that, or Pennsylvania, for example, it becomes something that has the potential to be a lot more far-reaching in its implications, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan, if you're not familiar with like American cultural geography, Michigan is one of these very unusual places because the United States is just a collection of a whole bunch of different cultures. People from Texas are really different than people from the East Coast or the West Coast. Well, in Michigan, you have some people living near cities, highly wealthy, the very like top of executive companies. A lot of it's been hollowed out. But then throughout the country, you have like really poor people. And you have people that were working blue collar jobs. You have people that I would say have the education level of a lot of what you would think of as the deep South in the US. And so this is a place where, interestingly, that causes some heterogeneity in the politics of that state. And when you start messing around with their ability to, that's what makes them get the attention of the national government. Is if you're a swing state, you get a lot more attention because the politicians know they need you. So to be able to do this in a place that's already shown they've had chicanery done with their elections, their governor's done all kinds of weird things with the FBI, it's not good. It doesn't bode well for democracy.
That's good. It's interesting to see the corollary. That's a really good way to put it. Like Alberta, for example, doesn't really get anything from the Conservative Party when they're in charge or the Liberals in charge, because the Liberals are like, well, we have nothing to gain there. And the Conservatives say, well, we've already got it locked up, so you guys are going to vote for us no matter what. We'll expend all our efforts and resources in other parts of the country where we have seats to win. And it's the opposite side of the coin, I would say, in downtown Toronto, which was why that recent by-election was so interesting.
Trudeau death throes. Trudeau is dealing with he's not as popular as he used to be.
No, he's incredibly unpopular. I think the only politician in Canada who's less popular than Trudeau right now is the Calgary mayor, who's absolutely made a boondoggle of the water crisis. And so this has been playing out in different interesting ways. He's like an animal caught in a trap that's just lashing out at anybody that comes near him and trying to, or actually, you know what? Probably a good comparison would be, when somebody's drowning and someone tries to help them, but they're so intent on getting out of the water that they'll push the person helping them down to try and get some air. That's basically what Trudeau is doing now on the political stage. And so right now he's setting up Chrystia Freeland for a fall while simultaneously trying to set up Mark Carney, who had kind of been circling the carcass, or it's like circling the dying man, waiting for him to die so that he could swoop in and eat everything up. Mark Carney is a big finance guy in Canada, and it was looking like he was going to be the leader for a while, and now it looks like he's setting Carney up to be the finance minister. And so there was an article that just got published in the Globe and Mail saying that there's some clashing between Chrystia Freeland and the Prime Minister's organization, the PMO, about her lack of ability to sell Canadians on the liberal idea of economics, which, to be totally fair, I don't think anybody could sell anyone on that. And this is the exact same thing from the exact same person who wrote the article that was kind of the first domino in former finance minister Bill Morneau's political downfall. And so you're seeing history repeat itself in Canada right now.
Yeah, these are all characters that I don't really know anything about, but I do sense that once you start throwing people under the bus, it's like it signals that the chaos is on the path. And it seems like that's what this article was saying, is that he's throwing somebody that's been really important to him in the past right there under the bus.
That's totally true. No matter how much she sucked at her job, which was a lot, she did stalwartly toe the party line, and all that's getting her is getting thrown under the same bus that Bill Morneau had been thrown under, that Jody Wilson-Raybould, that Helena Cesar Chavez had been thrown under. All these people, the Gerald Butts. On the one hand, you hate to see him get off scot-free again. On the other hand, you love to see these people who have no business being at the seat of power being kicked away from it.
The NDP is not a serious party.
Yes. So this is just a real quick, I don't know. It seems like we do this every week, but this is Cian Bexley from the Counter Signal reporting at the NDP Stampede Barbecue.
Will supposedly come out they're having a great time already.
For anybody that's going to be listening to this, I would have no idea. He's just standing there. He's trying to report, and there's this giant sign that just falls over. And
this giant sign in the background that says NDP. And while he's reporting on it, the sign falls over. And it's classic NDP.
NATO support is AWOL.
Yes. So one of the many excuses that Trudeau presented for not attending the Stampede was that he had this NATO summit to go to, despite the fact that it wasn't a perfect overlap. And there's been historically a lot of pushback towards Canada because the expectation is that they would have 2% of their budget go towards military funding. And it's not totally clear whether that includes tampons or not. But regardless, they've been significantly less than that year after year. And now all of a sudden, out of the blue, Trudeau says that by 2035, we'll be making that commitment. Okay, well, you guys are part of NATO. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just amazing how politicians can do these things where they say, we're going to do something in 12 years or whatever. Like, it's like the perfect way to not be held accountable for anything at all, because nobody in their regular lives can be like, honey, I'll solve the roof leaking starting in 2034. Like, it's just not going to happen. But you can do it in government. You can sometimes do it if you're a big corporation, and it's just absurd.
Darling, by the year 2076, I promise to fix the banister on the stairs.
I mean, you just have to figure why is he not supporting NATO at the level that he agreed to? It's because, one, you're not afraid of being kicked out of it, and two, you don't think it's that important. And I happen to be on the side of the I would actually be very okay with NATO dissolving and finding some other way to do our alliances, because I think NATO is dragging us into insane, absurd wars. But I don't think he is doing this strategically. I think he's doing it not strategically.
Well, it seems like a knee-jerk reaction, and you had one of the oh shoot, where is it? Oh, I'm missing it. But oh yes, here we go. So this is one of your
priority and
American
commitment.
friends.
I mean, by contrast, shamefully, Canada announced in the last few days or last couple of days that they won't be ponying up. They're not going to do their 2%. Why?
So this is I'm not sure exactly who this is, but some U.S. official. I don't know. I assume you guys barbecue together or something like that. But anyway, there's him literally calling Canada shameful because of this. And then now you've finally got him ponying up to this. And I'm guessing that at the summit, somebody pulled him aside and said, "You've had a lot of bad press lately. Why don't you stop being a lagabout piece of shit when it comes to the NATO spending? Because we're going to drag you through the coals on it. And I don't think that you have enough political capital to endure that too." The other thing is this is him getting out and waving, getting out of Canada's Can Force One, I think it's called. Horribly unoriginal name, but whatever. Here's him getting out and waving to everybody. And here is what that wave looked like from a much further perspective. So him getting out of the plane and waving like there's just crowds of adoring fans. And then it turns out there's one guy with the camera and some airport people hanging about and one guy to salute him at the top. That's classic Trudeau showmanship. Not even showmanship, but just...
I mean, that, God bless the internet, because this is how we break off the facade that so much of politics is about, where you've got these people that are like pretending as though there's a giant crowd. Well, if you only have that shot and that's what the media tells you, then that's all you've got. But if you show that photo, it's so pathetic, right? He's getting off whatever that was, a 747. And, it'd be like me standing up as I'm exiting my flight, my Southwest flight, and waving at the crowd. It's just absurd, right? There's nobody there to care.
Yep. Yep. Be like you getting out of your car and there's a picture of him waving as he gets out of his car. Like, oh, actually, he's just going to Albertsons for some groceries.
Not everyone loves Pierre.
So this is interesting. This is a picture of some First Nations veterans, if I understand correctly, at a First Nations summit, turning their back when Pierre gets up to speak. And the First Nations relationships in Canada have been tumultuous from the get-go. There was probably a good week or two right at the start where they're like, oh, who are these people getting off the boats? But basically since then, it's kind of been a pretty bad situation all across the country. And this was, to be fair, at this Assembly of First Nations, the AFN convention, there were people at various times who called out all three major parties for being an absolute for doing a shit job of working with First Nations and working for First Nations. And this was the Polyev one. But there was like minutes long videos of, like I said, of various people calling out specifically Jagmeet Singh, Polyev, and Trudeau. And so that's
So
about it.
what is it that they're saying that Polyev is doing? I didn't understand the context here. Why are they specifically at his talk turning their back on him?
Those people, I can't say for sure. I know that the video where the lady was speaking to him, she was upset because there wasn't a land acknowledgement, which kind of made me want to roll my eyes. But fair enough. It's like the only time I've ever actually seen somebody think that that's important. She'd also said that there was no acknowledgement of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and there was no acknowledgement of the UNDRIP, which is the UN recognition of First Nations people. The exact acronyms escaping me at the moment. And she was also upset that he hadn't said anything about climate change. Now, there's quite a bit to criticize the Conservatives about on their track record, being previously in government, I would say quite correctly. Although I do think, and I've never had anybody correct me on this, the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, I think, was probably the best thing to happen to the First Nations communities in a very long time. And the Conservatives passed that, and it was one of the first things that the Liberals scrapped when they took government in 2015. So it doesn't matter who's been in charge, because they just deal with a bunch of bureaucrats in Gatineau, fucking Quebec, and their job is to keep their job, not to actually solve any problems. Because if your job is to solve problems for the First Nations people or anything else, and you solve all the problems, you don't have a job anymore. And so bureaucracy is their enemy, but none of the political parties are willing to take that on. But this is an outsider's perspective.
She puts the ass in ambassador.
So I didn't even know that this position existed. But Canada has an ambassador for climate change, which, I mean, it's interesting when you think about it. You know, when people are like, oh, I'm going to go on a bike for MS, or I'm going to do this fundraiser for cancer. Well, shouldn't it be against cancer? Right? Like, and so here we have this very poorly named ambassador for climate change. I guess because if we get a lot of climate change everywhere, then we can have more carbon taxes and everybody in Ottawa wins. And she spent $254,000 since being appointed 2 years ago, including up to $623 a night for hotels and travel. And so she's just been jet setting. Like, she has spent a fucking mortgage, or at least a mortgage a few years ago in Canada, on international travel for a position none of us even knew existed, to go around and talk about Canada's carbon tax.
Is one of these people that's paid to be a professional like person that goes to conferences and attends the cocktail parties, right? Like there's nobody that I'm guessing she's not some bang up amazing speaker, because otherwise we'd see videos of her giving talks about, you know, climate change that dazzle the audience. But instead it's just another bureaucrat probably sent around to go, you know, continue to tell people what the marching orders are.
Well, that's exactly it. Like, if she's worth spending $250,000 in 2 years just on travel, her wage probably matches that, I'm guessing, if not more. And you don't have just absolute banger after banger of clips of her speaking all around the world. She spent $15,000 and change, almost $16,000, just on return flights to Brazil at one point. She was there for 6 days, spent $17,500 on the trip, and almost 16 of it was the flights, because also she doesn't fly coach.
Well, you can't expect her to. She's probably got a lot of climate change work to do. You know, like she's probably got a lot of whatever it is that they do on those, you know, on the plane. And she also probably needs to be really well rested when she arrives wherever she's going. So she needs to have that extra leg room.
How many Zoom subscriptions can you buy for $17,500? Like, if this is the thing, is it never fails. It's the same thing we talk about with COP, or COP, whatever, whenever it happens in Egypt or wherever else, is that these people are like, we need to save the planet. And so we all need to get together and go to this conference. And at that conference, we'll all save the planet. And none of them say, you know what? We would probably save a lot more of the planet if we did this over Zoom. Maybe this could be an email. None of it ever occurs to them because God fucking forbid. See, that's the thing. When the rubber meets the road with all this climate change stuff, they're willing to sacrifice our travel, our vacations, our water usage, our whatever else. But their free trips all across the planet never stop. And that's when you know they're full of shit. And this is funny. Michelle Krieger says sounds about right for the government. And I'm not even sure which part she's talking about, but the answer is definitely yes.
New York City enters the 19th century.
Yes.
This is in reference to the $4 million that they spent with McKinsey & Co., this consulting group.
Yep.
To figure out how are we going to handle this trash problem. People are throwing all their trash on the ground. It's getting into the alleyways and that's leaking into the sewers. What are we going to do? And their brilliant answer was to have the mayor come out. You can watch him on this clip right here. He comes out from wherever he's at and he rolls a garbage can down the hill, parks it, opens up the lid and puts a bag of garbage into a garbage can. And it cost them $4 million to come up with this brilliant plan.
How much of that did they spend on licensing Rihanna for that sound clip? Right? But no, actually, none of it was, because that was McKinsey who did that. Who, if anybody is a longtime listener of the Mashup, McKinsey has more than its fair share of absolutely asinine government consultation fees in Canada. And so it's nice to know that they're pulling the same wool over our southern neighbors' eyes as well. But that's so apparently New York didn't have garbage cans until this point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they were using dumpsters before. I mean, and if you live in an apartment, you oftentimes have like just a garbage chute and you put it down there. Mm-hmm. But like garbage is everywhere. It never keeps up. I was in New York a couple of months ago, and that city is not the hopeful, exciting welcome to New York, where your dreams can come true that it used to be. And they're dealing
You're not back in the New York groove anymore.
Yeah.
That whole mentality has gone away.
I mean, because the people that are getting up and coming, they're, it's their startup, it's their big opportunity. It's not there in the way that it was. I mean, hell, there's going to be a Texas stock exchange, and that's going to move.
Oh, really?
Oh, you didn't hear about this? This is a big deal in the U.S. Is that
is it going to be based out of Austin?
I'm not sure if it was Austin or if it was Dallas, but it's basically saying, there are so many regulations that happen when you're in New York that they're choking our ability to, list companies on the stock exchange. How we set up our trading is always antiquated, and we always have to go through the New York State bureaucracy. Well, we're going to go someplace where we don't have to, and so
IPOs on the New York, I know, have fallen off a cliff in the past probably 10 years. Like basically nobody does IPOs anymore.
Yeah, and that could be for a variety of reasons. I mean, but the change to the New York Stock Exchange system, I think, is because they figured out like it's going to cost us less money to stop what we're doing here, move out of here, start an entirely new exchange, than to pay the toll collector that at every single opportunity they're collecting money off of these businesses that are trying to just do financial transactions.
See, that's a poor business model from their perspective, because ideally you want to charge people not quite enough that they want to do it themselves. That's the perfect price point.
You
right?
extract just enough to make it so like the where you stop just below the point where they're like, it's not worth it for us to leave. We'll just keep putting up with this. This is
Yep.
like my arch nemesis in the world is the QuickBooks that you use to do your taxes and run your small business. It's so annoying, and it's just at that level where moving is harder than staying with it, but you just have to, it's just like, okay, I'm going to take this hammer and smack my hand with it. It's the same thing. Well, I think the finance bros of New York finally decided, well, maybe we don't have to live like this and we can go somewhere else. We stand in line at Tim Hortons for thee.
Yeah, so you're going to love this one. 25-year-old man arrested following sexual assault. They actually skipped a whole bunch of them because it was very plural. By the way, Alan Kozak says you hit the nail on the head about QuickBooks. Yes. And then Michelle had said all kinds of businesses are relocating to Texas, both American and Canadian. And she also said you need a professional bookkeeper to help you with that QuickBooks. Maybe she's offering, I don't know, maybe she's a professional bookkeeper. I don't know. But RCMP said 25-year-old man arrested following sexual assault. It should be plural, but it isn't. A 25-year-old man originally from India but residing in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has been arrested following sexual assault incidents in Moncton. On July 7th, 2024, at approximately 2 p.m., members of the Kodiak Regional RCMP responded to a report of sexual interference and sexual assault at a public water park. When police arrived on the scene, they learned that the man had been walking around the premises and was groping people. There were at least 12 victims, some of whom were under the age of 16. Police located him, arrested him without incident. He was later released from custody and is scheduled to appear on October 24th. So he went around sexually assaulting at least a dozen people, some of which were kids. They took him to the station, fingerprinted him, mug shots, and then said, be on your way.
You know, this is the type of stuff that is actually really dangerous and destabilizing for a culture, because the reason that you have a justice system, the reason you give the police that monopoly on force, which makes them a dangerous force in the world, is because if you don't have justice for the types of crimes like sexual assault, like harming children, like really anything, but some of the most delicate ones, then what you have is mobs that form to say, well, if they're not going to fix it, we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And once you have that sort of mentality that we're going to go get vigilante justice, then you can have all kinds of people get swept into that sort of chaos. So the police not taking care of this stuff is very destabilizing. And you have to ask yourself, why would they do this? Like, what is the reason? Is it a conscious decision? Because this is so destabilizing, because not only is the victim somebody that's going to be hurt by this and want to see justice, but if they have any men in their lives, parents in their lives, those people are going to want to get justice too. And you can take a really normal and rational person and turn them into an irrational member of a mob that can't be controlled once they're started.
You know, I agree with everything right up till the irrational part. I would say, you know, in these situations where you have no recourse, where nothing's being done, the rational thing is something needs to be done. And if the people who say that they're there to do it aren't going to do it, the rational thing would be to do it yourself. And that's the problem, is that it makes a lot of sense.
It's never rational to join a mob. It's never. The mob is the most dangerous force on earth.
Yeah, but it doesn't even need to be a mob in that situation. It would have been really easy for somebody's dad, one of those kids' dad, to just go over there and punch him out cold into the pool. And now all of a sudden you've got a guy who drowned, and it's a hate crime.
The question is really, why is your RCMP doing this? And I don't have any good answers for it, because it seems like, at least in the United States, they have a factory system of locking people up, which in the private prison system, and it's disgusting how many.
We could use a little bit of that.
Up. Yeah, well,
we could use just a little bit of it. and we could speculate and say, okay, well, you know what? It's probably because they're worried about the fact that he's a visible minority. And you see a lot of that in Canada with First Nations communities where they take the race of the perpetrator into account because everything needs to be about race in Canada. And so we need to look at the race of the person who's done the crime, but they never look at the race of the person the crime was done to. They don't say, oh, well, you assaulted a First Nations person. You're a First Nations person, so you get off easy. It's not you assaulted a First Nations person, so we're going to give you more jail or whatever it is. And I find it absolutely astounding that we look at one side of the coin and not the other.
And the communities that are actually having this happen to them, like where he comes from, where the if he's a part of the Indian community, they're the ones that actually suffer the most outside of the victims, right? Because now you have people that, well, you think, because like if all of a sudden people start saying, well, those people do these things, that's where you start having real racism. And that racism leads to all sorts of bad consequences. So this type of stuff where you're not getting justice is bad for everybody, and it leads to, bad outcomes. There's never been a better time to be white.
I hadn't planned on that segueing so perfectly, but there we go. So this is, and I hate these freaking pop-up ads, man. Let me tell you. So from the New York Post, expecting people to be on time is part of white supremacy culture, Duke Medical School claims. I was just going to say it's probably even doubly bad that it's medical school, because you'd say, like, you get a prescription for something and it says take these at certain times a day. Take 2 of these at this time, 2 of these at this time, whatever else. Being on time is kind of, as important as it is for things like art history and whatever else, because everyone's expecting you to be in a classroom at a certain time. I would say that medical school would probably do a better job than any of them of displaying the importance of timeliness.
Yeah, I mean, I have some weird insights on this. Is that, there is a concept of island time or of Tico time, right? Where these places that were in typically equatorial places, nice and warm places, they follow a concept called polychronic time. Polychronic time means you care more about the relationships and being present with what you're doing now than you would to get up and leave a conversation to be able to go to another conversation. Whereas in the Western world, US, Canada, Germany, Japan, you have monochronic time, which says, we all are on the same timeline. And if I say to you, hey, Twos, I got to be done at noon because I got to go meet somebody else, you're not going to be offended by this. This isn't going to hurt you. And the reason that you have this cultural difference is because in an industrialized world, everybody has to operate on time. You can't have somebody just deciding not to show up. You can't have somebody that says, well, sometimes our meetings start at noon and sometimes they start at 1:30, which if you've been to, like where I lived in Kenya, like you didn't know if you're having a meeting in the afternoon, that might be 1 o'clock or it might be 4:30. And you just can't run an economy like that. So this sort of thinking where they're saying, oh, what we should do is consider this to be racist is actually like the tyranny of low expectations and not helping people get on board with the fact that if you want to be a part of a developed economy, you have to follow time. It's the most critical thing. Time is money. It's a part of our culture. And it's absurd, this article, when I read through it.
I think you're exactly right. That's interesting. I never heard that, the poly and the monochronic time. That's every single time I talk to you, Vance, I've always got a new insight, a new takeaway.
What a boondoggle. So
Texas had a bunch of power outages in Houston because of a small hurricane, an itty bitty hurricane. 2 million people were left without power, and nobody really knew what was going on or where things worked or not. And then somebody realized that while they couldn't get any good information from the government, they could look at the Whataburger app, and the Whataburger app, if you went to order now, would show you which Whataburger locations, which, Jesus Christ, I've been to Texas multiple times, and I don't think I've ever been to Whataburger. And I wonder what I'm missing out on, because that's just Houston right there on the map. That's how many Whataburgers there are. Like, I feel like people have them in their houses. Like, hey, where's the bathroom? It's just the second left after Whataburger. And so anyway, to wrap this up, basically what people did was they just looked at the Whataburger app to figure out where the power was and wasn't, because the Whataburger app would update with where people had electricity.
This reminds me of the Waffle House Index. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. So in the U.S.,
no idea.
They use the Waffle House is like a greasy spoon kind of diner place, but it's like really the bottom of the spectrum, right?
It's,
like you go
it's
there
like
and
Denny's with fistfights, from what I understand.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of midnight fistfights, drunken people going in there. Well, so you can tell just how bad a hurricane or a snowstorm was based on, did Waffle House shut down? Because they never shut down. And so if your Waffle House is for some reason not open, you know that basically the apocalypse has come your way.
The 4 horsemen are getting drive-through.
Liberal rat jumping ship of the week.
So for those of you who follow along, oh, that's a perfect little GIF popping up with the tweet there of the liberal ship sinking. There have been quite a few liberal members of parliament who've said that they won't be seeking election, or who have been saying, or who have just been like, hey, I'm retiring early, or whatever it is. And this is the latest in a long list. The Liberal MP for Northwest Territories, Michael McLeod, will not be seeking re-election. Now, I think that's probably one of the first times I've ever even heard that guy's name. It's interesting when you think that there's, 150 Liberal members of Parliament, roughly. I could imagine a bunch of them in Toronto getting lost in the mix because they all live within 10 kilometers of each other and none of them really have anything exciting to say. But you would think that a guy who handles the entire Northwest Territories might be somebody who popped up in the news every once in a while, but he didn't. And on an unrelated note, the Northwest Territories, the riding that he's in, is currently one of the few ridings in Canada where the NDP are looking to take a seat. He's actually a 2-1 favorite to lose his seat right now. And the Liberals are losing support, so it's presumably only going to get worse for him. So he looks like he's not going to win his seat already, and that's the thread of commonality, is that none of these people, none of these Liberal guys who are saying they're not running for re-election, or that they're retiring, or that they want to spend more time with their family, none of them are the odds-on favorites to keep their seat in the next election. Funny how that always seems to work.
Yeah, are you thinking that there's going to be a giant turnover? Will there be a big flip from Liberal to Conservative in Canada because you see things like this?
Well, there's so many of them. When you look at, so right now, because it's easy to have up here, you've got, this is a website that does an amalgamation of Canadian polling. So it's not one individual poll, it aggregates all the data. And right now it's got the Conservatives at nearly double. They've got 42%, and the Liberals have 24% of support. And on the right-hand side is your seat projection with the Conservatives. The aggregate polling is saying 213. So there's some outliers on the high side that are getting as high as 250 seats. But the aggregate polling says 213, as low as 179, and they need, and that's worst case scenario. Like the worst case out of 100 loss. The worst possible Monte Carlo outcome is them only having a little bit of a majority. And so the Liberals are looking to have somewhere between 50 and 99 seats, and somewhere down here, oh, maybe it isn't here, but basically it's looking like roughly somewhere between a half and 2/3 of the Liberal people are going to be losing their seats. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in the weird way that you guys run your elections and how all that works, I can vaguely see it if I squint.
Okay, think of this as the Electoral College, except fewer duffel bags, votes actually counted by hand, and no water pipes going out in Michigan at 4 a.m. Oh, and Trudeau, to the best of our knowledge, has not shat himself.
Canada no longer powerful.
Yes, so from the Financial Post, Canada's energy blindness must end. Its monthly update on energy trends, Stats Canada reported this week that this year, for the first time ever, Canada has become a net importer of electricity. We're pulling more power in from the States than we are sending out. We have some of the largest untapped natural resources in the world, and they're absolutely being strangled by red tape and bad policy. And like, just imagine you got 200 head of cattle and you're going to the grocery store for burgers. That's basically where we're at as far as power goes.
And this is crazy because, the reality is we have never needed more energy than we need right now. And that's not that surprising. But with AI and Bitcoin becoming major forces in Western developed economies, these have unbounded demands for electricity. People don't really think so much that, think about how much the electrical grid need for electric cars or how much do we need for our air conditioning. But what is going to be just soaking up energy endlessly is AI and Bitcoin too. And so getting rid of that red tape, making it as easy as possible to generate and sell electricity is one of the most important things any developed economy can do.
I mean, why would you not have it just the simplest things? Like, what's stopping somebody from having a bicycle in their home office that they could just trickle some power onto the grid with? It might just be pennies here and there, but it'd be a fun way to just be like, okay, well, you know what? I'm at work, and you know how people have like the standing treadmills and things like that. Just simple things, as many ways as possible. There's this book called Turning Oil into Salt. And the idea is that salt used to be the most valuable substance in the world. People were worth their salt. The word salary comes from salt because people used to get paid in salt. Because if you didn't have enough salt, you died. And then as people found more ways to get salt and more ways to store food, it became less and less important. And we need to get power to that. Things like nuclear, if solar and wind can solve a lot of our problems, let's do it. But if they don't, let's not pay for it. Let's do whatever makes the most sense. Alberta just phased out its last coal generator a week or two ago. And Michelle, this is why we need to keep our coal-fired plants running and forget this green crap. Yeah, absolutely. Like, until we get to the point where it doesn't make sense, do it till it doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons other than regulation. And it's funny because at the same time, there's just another recent survey, levels of comfort with countries as energy partners. And the question was basically, would you feel comfortable, neutral, or not comfortable at all with being an energy partner with the following countries? And here's the thing is, we shouldn't even have to worry about this. This shouldn't even be a question. It should just be, look, we can sell off a little bit here and there to whoever wants it, but we don't need to be partners with anybody. Like, we've had so many people come looking for natural gas, and Trudeau just tells them to kick rocks. Why don't we just use our own and not have to import other stuff? We would have had more bills in BC shut this season because of red tape, Zane. And then again, agreeing with what Michelle had to say about the dirty coal. Like these are silly questions and conversations that we shouldn't even be having. What were you saying, Vance?
Well, I was going to say, there's a whole nother thing, and I always talk about Bitcoin whenever I'm on the Mashup, but like,
Yeah.
you don't even have to worry about transmitting the energy. You can just generate it and then make it cheap as possible, and Bitcoin miners will pop up there, and you'll be able to convert that electricity into Bitcoin, and then people that want to buy that Bitcoin can buy it anywhere in the world. And it's essentially like digitizing electricity and transmitting it. So you can now start generating some of that electricity that's trapped or far away from cities, and we can utilize Alberta's natural resources. You guys also have a lot of uranium resources. You can be building nuclear. It makes no sense why Canada isn't producing so much energy that it's practically free for your citizens, and then sell it to the market.
Wait, I heard, I think it was at last S&P Presents. The guy who talked about Bitcoin said that, he was expecting in the coming years that Bitcoin mining was going to take up like half of energy usage.
Well, the brilliant thing about this is that, like, for example, if you have a heat wave where it's burning a white hole into your map, and people now need to start using their air conditioners, what's great is you can take those Bitcoin miners and just turn them off, and nothing happens to the Bitcoin miner. And now you have the surplus of energy that you don't normally need, and you can feed that into the grid. And so Bitcoin is going to make it so you don't have these wild fluctuations. And the more you shut down things like coal plants, which are able to turn on and off for electricity generation really quickly, the more you don't have the supply when you have increased demand. So Bitcoin miners, I think, are a way to level out big problems in the grid.
Well, I mean, here on the Mashup, we're big fans of anything that'll flatten the curve. All right, and here we go.
Elizabeth May is insane.
She is. She just recently here.
And I feel very, very committed, as I think everybody my age should. Baby boomers have this planet, and we can't walk away and leave it for our kids to fix it. And I'm sorry I just used the F word out loud, but I think kids understand what I'm saying.
She's a crazy old lady. And then it was funny because she talks about her usage of the F word, and it reminded me of this other instance with another F word in Parliament.
Why does this government?
It didn't play.
That is where my constituents, a fart in the room that nobody wants to talk about or acknowledge. That is where my constituents have been at with this government for over a year. As I'm giving this speech, there's Liberal members across the aisle that are laughing at me. Yeah. And they're laughing at you. Yeah.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Interrupt my friend in her speech, but I heard her say a word that I know is distinctly unparliamentary, and I think she may want to withdraw it. The word was F-A-R-T.
We don't.
So she's okay with the word. She's okay with the word fuck, but fart is a line too far. It's just got too much of a stink to it. So this is Elizabeth May. This is the leader of our Green Party, which actually doesn't even have official party status. So she technically sits, I think, as an independent, I think. But this is Elizabeth May, and she never fails to disappoint. I mean, she's kind of like if AOC became a crazy old cat lady with an eye that was so lazy it became socialist.
Another brick in the wall.
Oh, here, just real quick. FAFA, fart around and find out. FAFO. Yes. Okay, so another brick in the wall.
So this is the story about the cops that did a huge bust on the Lego set theft ring that's been going on.
Yes, in Oregon, of all random places. there was a brick builder store in Eugene, and after a lengthy investigation, and this picture's insane. This is what they seized. Like, you see all these pictures of cops with like bricks of cocaine or piles of guns or whatever else, and they're standing in front of like hundreds, thousands of Lego sets. And it's in many cases, suspects stole hundreds of dollars worth of Legos. And I think that they said that the value was 4,153 sets of Legos with a total value of over $200,000.
Well, I think there's something really interesting to be pointed out about this story, and that is something I heard about the toy industry. Right now in the US, I'm sure it's happening in Canada, toy companies are crashing and burning. And these are this is the canary in the coal mine of how many fewer children we have. And just like colleges are suffering, they don't have enough people. So now Legos, what they have done is retargeted who is their market, because it's not kids. Kids don't have the disposable income, and there aren't enough of them to be able to make their industry stand up. So what they've had to do is retarget and make high value nostalgic toys for millennials and above, because those are the people with the disposable income. So they really are creating really high valuable like Legos. It's not like the Legos you and I were doing. It's got to be kits and things like this that are really
like the
expensive.
giant Millennium Falcon type thing.
Exactly. So their whole market is going to move away from them being a kids company and more to being like a toy for millennial aged people.
Well, that's really interesting. It's a smart pivot. I wonder if there's a really interesting HBR article about that, because Lego, I think, is one of the two largest Danish companies, the other one being Maersk, the transport company. And so now if your target demographic stops living, like what happens with CBC in Canada, for example, how do you pivot and where do you go from there? And then the interesting ramifications of that is that now you've got these high value, relatively transferable sets, right? I mean, they're fungible almost, you could say, in that you could steal $500 worth of something that you could fit down your shirt, which isn't really the case in a lot of things. And so now, because of that, they've become highly sought after in the black market. And now you've got this big theft thing. I was kind of disappointed, though. I was hoping that they would get more into how they got stolen, more the heist angle of it. But the fact that they did bust all these guys, I thought was quite interesting. And then here, Zane Southgate says, how many mimosas deep was that drunkard when she walked to the platform? One of the other things Elizabeth May is known for is that she gave this drunken, ridiculous speech where she was like playing a song on her phone and singing along to it, and someone had to drag her off stage because she was going on and on about Omar Khadr while absolutely wasted. So that's another classic Elizabeth May. She's also afraid of Wi-Fi.
But that wasn't real electric buses.
So York, Ontario is proud to announce, well, Trudeau is proud to announce that York, Ontario is getting a fleet of electric buses. And it's part of the Liberal throw all kinds of money at green initiatives to say that. Now, have you well, I mean, you said this is your favorite podcast. Have you noticed that we've covered quite a few of these?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is like obviously a scam that everybody's trying to get in under the wire before it becomes so painfully obvious that electric buses in Canada aren't going to work.
Yes. So in Edmonton, they spent another $250,000 per bus to put heat blankets on the batteries because they weren't working. And then even then in the winter, their range was about half of what it was. And then the company that they bought them from went into receivership, so they couldn't get spare parts. So the whole electric fleet is just parked in some back lot somewhere. Regina did a bunch of this. There's been numerous examples of this all over Canada. And despite that, we just keep doubling and tripling and quadrupling down. And then it's always fun because now, I get to keep York in the back of my mind and say, okay, well, in 6 or 8 months, or maybe perhaps a year, we're going to get to revisit this article. And it's going to say that all of the wheels fell off because they were made out of, I don't know, tree branches instead of rubber, or whatever the hell they're going to do with these stupid electric buses to make them as green as possible next. So I guess watch for that because it's coming up soon.
Trudeau versus Pierre.
So one of the things, have you ever been to the Calgary Stampede?
No, I've been there the week before the Calgary Stampede as things were getting set, but I was gone before it happened.
Okay, well, I mean, it's a big deal. And as we talked about last week with Chuck, who, by the way, great job, and thanks for coming on last week. I should have mentioned that sooner, and I apologize. Is that it's this longstanding tradition that whoever happens to be in charge of Canada at the moment drops by, takes a few pictures, does a bit of an appearance, flips pancakes, because one of the things is that there's pancake breakfast all over the city for like a week straight. And then Trudeau said he wasn't going to go. And then Diana Thomas says Ponoka is the better show now. Well, I might actually argue that it was a better show for a while. That's actually where my parents met. But this, just to lead into this whole thing about the Stampede, this is Mick Jagger at a Stones concert in Vancouver.
We love your Mr. Trudeau. I mean, his family has always been such big fans about that.
And then he pivots.
By the way, congratulations on the Canadian soccer team getting to the semi-finals.
So, classic showman. He realizes that something just falls like a lead balloon and pivots. But, I mean, that's Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones, who Justin's mom famously had some interesting situations with in the past. I don't know if you've ever heard about that.
No, I just know about him and and Castro, but I don't know about the Rolling Stones.
Well, I mean, she was a bit of a Rolling Stone herself. She didn't gather any moss, that's for sure. And then years later, her son Justin decided to paint it blackface. But anyway, this isn't Alberta. This is Vancouver, which is a lot like Portland. And so imagine hearing "Let's Go Brandon" in Portland. This is basically the equivalent of that. And then you've got so Trudeau skipped it. Here is Randy Bissonalt and Chrystia Freeland doing just some random stock photo were they even at an event or anything like that? Or did they just pose for a photo? There was no public appearance by any of them. And then here is Poilievre showing up not at a conservative function. He showed up at the Cowboys tent, which is probably arguably the biggest concert in the Stampede. So this is just public, open to everybody, and it's packed with thousands of people. And he just shows up on stage. And Axe the Tax chant. And then later on, he gets the whole crowd. Oh, shoot. I've been talking about it, but it's not up. All right. Well, whatever. Here's Poilievre, and he gets the whole crowd to do the national anthem in the old words before Trudeau changed them. This is not a canned event. This is him showing up at a concert and just doing that. So
seems like his stock is going up.
It does, and Trudeau's is falling, and also Jagmeet Singh's. Why are Trudeau and Singh avoiding the Stampede this year? And it's interesting. It talks about, It says political watchers say the absence of Trudeau and Singh are calculated defensive moves to protect against friendly fire they may encounter at the outdoor festival. They're not getting friendly fire. They're going to get shot out of the fucking sky. And you still, at this point, have our media running protection on them. And Murray says, let's go, Brandon, and flush the turd. And Glenn Giebert says, well, technically rubber comes from trees. Well, you know what? Technically, that sort of thing isn't allowed here, Glenn. We're going to have to block you. Correcting me on my own podcast live stream? Unacceptable. That's a callback to that, me saying that the tires would be made out of trees or whatever. And yes, I guess technically they are. Smart ass.
Trudeau versus Saskatchewan.
I always love getting people who aren't from Saskatchewan to say Saskatchewan.
Did I say it wrong?
Oh, you didn't say it. Well, it just, whenever somebody who isn't from Saskatchewan says it, they always say it like they're sounding it out for the first time. But I imagine it's the same thing. Like when someone's from Newfoundland, it's basically Newfoundland. Like you say the first, almost all of it as fast as you possibly can, and then you stretch out the end of it. And in Saskatchewan, you just kind of I don't know. It's a few consonants and a whole lot of apostrophes if you were to phonetically write out how we say it. But Saskatchewan wins the injunction to block Revenue Canada, CRA, from collecting carbon tax.
So the premier said that he won't be collecting carbon taxes on home heating fuel to match a deal that Trudeau is giving the Atlantic Canada. So
yes,
the
that's
fight
exactly
continues.
right.
They won a pretty big battle.
Well, this is just how it's playing out. It ties in a lot to what I was saying before about how the politicians look after what's going to win them votes and where it's going to win them votes. And Trudeau doesn't have a lot to gain in Western Canada. Well, he's got everything to gain in Western Canada, but no way to do it. And so when Eastern Canada and Atlantic Canada voted for him and he ran on a carbon tax, he gave them the carbon tax they voted for. And then they said, well, hold up a sec. This is way too goddamn expensive. And he said, rather than saying, well, look, you guys voted for this and you're going to get it, he said, well, I want to win the next election. So I tell you what, we are going to cancel the carbon tax on your home heating oil, which is what a lot of Western Canada uses, despite the giant carbon footprint and despite us having oodles of better energy options in Western Canada. And then he said, we're going to give you guys all free heat pumps and get Alberta and Saskatchewan to pay for them. And then Saskatchewan said, well, look, if you're given a deal, exactly like you said, on home heating fuel, Saskatchewan's going to get the same thing. In Saskatchewan, SaskPower is a crown corporation, so they uniquely have the ability, the government has the ability to step in and say, don't collect the carbon tax. And that's what they did. And now it's just this, it's a win for Saskatchewan, but the battle isn't quite over yet. The feds are saying that Saskatchewan owes them $42 million in carbon tax revenue. And Saskatchewan says, well, we never charged them for it. We're not going to. And you guys can piss up a rope. And they got the injunction to hold off on that. So this is kind of like this is like the halftime report of this particular battle. If that makes sense to my American friends.
I can understand the words you're using, halftime, things like that.
Oh, Zane's going to love this one. You have to say it exactly how it's written. That's the rule.
Self-identified disaster.
Yes, that should have been a hyphen. But if you hit the zero next to it, it says self-identified. And I think I spelled identified wrong, too. I was writing them up quickly because we got busy chatting. So this is growing tension inside the public service over Indigenous self-identification. So there's been a lot of stuff happening in Canada lately where you can just say that you're Indigenous and everyone is required by law to take your word for it. And then you get things like preferential treatment in the judicial system or an easier time finding a job and better opportunities for your career and whatnot. And it's reaching a critical point because basically at this point, everybody's just saying they're indigenous, whether they are or not. So we're all going full Elizabeth Warren. So anyway, there was this this got leaked to CBC that which Indigenous Services Canada is having issues with this. And it's interesting that this article talks about how this thing has largely escaped scrutiny, despite the fact that we've talked about it on the Mashup. But it's just that the mainstream hasn't really picked up on it much. Although CBC did a really good expose on somebody who established an entire career going back to like the 90s, just grifting and saying that she was First Nations when she wasn't. And probably our most famous First Nations musician, Buffy St. Marie, who used to be married to Neil Young or used to play with him or be in a band with him or something like that, saying that she was First Nations the whole time. It's just been a big grift. And there's a couple really telling things in this article. Her decision to address the issue signals a growing tension around a lack of identity verification, which greatly impacts authentic Indigenous staff. People are getting hurt and hurt very badly to the point where they become demoralized because people who say they're Indigenous are getting these jobs over people who aren't. Well, I wonder how everybody else thinks about all this, right? And the most sinister thing about the current system is not just people with dubious claims can benefit professionally, but they can land positions of high authority and influence just by checking a box.
Yeah, this is not good for anybody. That I don't know. I struggle to comment on your Canadian ways because I don't really understand the First Nations concept and the culture. Like we have a lot of diversity initiatives here that, but the ones that you guys have in Canada are very foreign to me. They're not something I understand at all.
Yeah. Well, basically, if you say that you're First Nations, you get and depending on where you buy it, you get cheaper gas and smokes. If you live on a reservation, there's tax exemptions, assuming that you're working on First Nations land as well. There's a few things to jump through. It's not just, oh, you're First Nations, you don't pay taxes, but there are tax exemptions. And then also you get preferential hiring. You get put at the top of the list for anything at any progressive company, which in Canada is most of them. So there's still a few that are just like, well, can you do the job and can you do the job better than everybody else? But a lot of them are, well, we need one midget, we need 3 lesbians, we need a Hispanic with Down syndrome, and we need a First Nation person with Tourette's, right? And then after that, if we still have any positions available, we'll hire some whiteys. But the public service could be fertile ground for race shifting. They've even got a name for it now, race shifting, given the job security, lucrative salaries, and its size. The public sector, in this article about the public sector, written by people in the public sector, say that the public sector has job security, lucrative salaries, and is big. All the things that we've been complaining about in the public sector, they're talking about. And the fact that you can get an incredible career opportunity just by checking a box.
Happy news.
So I don't know if you saw this or not, but archaeologists have discovered the ruins of a 4,000-year-old temple in the sandy desert district of Zana in Peru. The team also found skeletal human remains, which may have been offerings for religious rituals. Or, I mean, it's been there for 4,000 years. Maybe somebody just died there. But it is a pretty cool spot. They found some cool things. And they just started digging this up in June, and this is how much they've done with it. Like, I always think of archaeological digs. Like, they still haven't even uncovered Pompeii entirely yet. Right? Like, there's whole areas of it that haven't even been
throughout
dug up.
Latin America, it's like that, right? You go to Guatemala, they have entire temples that they're like, we know they're under here, but we don't have the time to remove all this jungle. And the temple is so large that you're climbing on it. You think you're on a mountain, and they're like, no, we know there's stone underneath here. We just haven't had the time to get it all dug out.
Think about all the cool stuff that's just sitting there that, who knows, right? And so anyway, Peru. So this is, the Sandy Desert district of Zana in Peru. It's just a little bit south of Ecuador, pretty much just a little bit off the coast. And they found this old ass temple. And happy news for Dr. Hoffa out of BC for his challenge on judicial notice from Leanne Taylor. I have no idea what that means. But if you say it's happy news and it doesn't have to do with the Oilers, I'm going to agree with you. Now, community notes. We have Sundre, Alberta is having a music festival August 16th and 17th, I believe it is. Julian Austin's going to be there, a bunch of bands I don't know, and putting on the Foil, who you should absolutely go check out. I'm going to pull an audible, put you right on the spot here, Vance. Anything interesting happening in and around St. Louis that anybody should know about?
No, my 2-year-old just celebrated her 2nd birthday yesterday. So, we're going to definitely do some weekend fun things. But as far as the larger community, I'm so consumed with just keeping these little children alive that I don't know anything that's going on.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's pretty much it then. We've got, unless somebody else has other community notes, things that they want to tell us about, we're going to call her here. Oh, Leanne says it's so good. Look up Shadow on the Shadow Davis show. Shadow Davis out in Winnipeg, former radio guy who got his own podcast. Pretty interesting dude to talk to. I'm going to have to go check that out. All right, well, we're going to call it here. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thanks so much, Vance, for joining us again. This was a lot of fun. Don't just hang up.
Always a blast to be on, man. Thanks.